doing the judging. It's a complex situation. But anyway, Sophie Pemberton is recognized as the first professionally trained artist from this province. She was the first one who really had come from here and learned how to do it. And she lived a long and fascinating life. She went back, she stayed in Victoria. In 1905, she got married. She was in her mid-30s. I guess there was a lot of pressure on her to get married. And she married the canon, the minister of the cathedral here. And as it turned out, he was a total wet blanket. He moved her back to England, into the countryside. She had to put up with his 4 stepchildren, and he didn't want her having any career as an artist at all. Tough luck, Sophie. She spent quite a while not very happy doing that. But then he died, and things got better. And in 1920, she married a hunt and shoot and fishing kind of guy who had a lot of money. He made it in the rubber business, who took her on a trip around the world. It took years, and she painted in India, and she painted in Japan, and she painted around the Mediterranean, and she just had a great life. And it really worked out well for her. In the end, after he died, she came back to Victoria and lived out her years here, and until her death in 1959. And she had a number of exhibitions at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria in those last years. Colin Graham was very favorable towards Sophie Pemberton. This is a painting of Dallas Road by a fantastic artist, although this is not a particularly good representation of his work. He didn't paint much of Victoria. His name was Charles John Collings. And Collings was an artist who had a fantastic reputation in London at the turn of the century in a very esoteric style. He had this way of painting watercolors on very wet paper and then lifting the color back out of them. It was all misty and esoteric and beautiful. It went with the literary flavor of the time in high circles. He came out to Canada and to the West Coast with behind him terrific representation by a very prestigious gallery in London. And he lived and worked here, but exhibited in London for many years afterwards. He built a great country home for himself in the way up the Fraser Valley. And his paintings are hard to come by. The Maltwood Museum owns a couple of exquisite examples of his mountain paintings. Very small, but so beautiful. But Uno Langman, the dealer on the south of Granville Street, is a great connoisseur of this guy, and has essentially bought everything of Charles John Collings that came onto the market. Anyway, this is a painting of Victoria. Naturally. Oh, now who's that? What's she doing in here? Her and her dog. Well, I'm sure you know perfectly well who she is. And if I had gone further and made more slides for you this evening, we could have shown you slides of Emily Carr's ink drawings of the Inner Harbor, of the Rock Bay Bridge, of in the exhibition at the museum at the moment, they have their lovely drawing of the barn out behind the family's home on Government Street. She didn't mind drawing and painting Victoria at all. But eventually she got involved with something else. As you know, she went and spent almost 4 years in London. After a number of years in San Francisco, I mean, she really worked on her education. She worked and studied in San Francisco and became a very good colonial type of artist. But then she went off to London. She really wanted to go to France, but her family, I mean, nobody would consider having a young woman go to that den of iniquity in Paris, you know. So she went to London, but she didn't do well in a big city with a lot of smoke, and it drove her crazy. They said she was hysterical. You know, that was the doctor's definition. It's hysterical. It's an uppity woman, I think, is the medical terminology. But she was institutionalized for a number of years, for 18 months, with a regimen of bed rest and fresh air. That drove her just about crazy. brought in birds' nests beside her bed. Anyway, she eventually got out of there and went out to the countryside and got some excellent art training. And she became a really interesting English watercolorist. She came back here and decided Victoria wasn't good enough. She went to Vancouver. She taught school there at a private school for about 15 minutes. And then she quit that. And then she set up her studio on Granville Street. And she worked for years on Granville Street holding art classes and meeting up with the basket makers from North Vancouver, her friend Sophie. It saved up her money, and finally, in 1910, she went to France. She went with her sister. Lived in Paris for a while. She couldn't speak a word of French, although her sister could a bit. And then she went out to the countryside, and she got some excellent teaching by an Englishman, and especially Frances Hodgkins, a woman from New Zealand. And she learned how to become a modernist painter. She learned how to paint things in a very different way. And that's when she developed this style. And she came back and she went out to the Queen Charlotte's right away. I won't belabor the point, but you can see, I think this is an excellent example of her watercolor style and a painting done on location on that first trip. There are many other paintings she did after she came back from drawings and sketches on this trip, but this is one she made while she was there. And this is too. This is made on location in the Skeena River Valley. You know enough about her. Amazing exploits. The fact that she would do such a thing was quite beyond the belief of people that a woman on her own would go and hang out with the Indians. I mean, there's a million reasons why not. The reason I'm showing you this one, though, is because that leads up to this one, which is the attic of the House of All Sorts. 626 Simcoe Street. You can see the eagles, the very same ones as in the last painting, which she painted here. I mean, I like to think she made her little bed here. And this is the underneath the roof of her house. These are frogs all the way along here, and the two eagles. It's an amazing place, but it is a fourplex, fully inhabited. It's a National Historic Site, but I spoke to the lady who owned it. She took me up there in the first place, and she said, you know, could you give me some advice? What are we supposed to do? Like, if we take the roof off and give it to a museum, it will never be the attic. And the paintings aren't really much, except that they're Emily Carr's. Whereas if we leave it here, nobody will ever be able to see it. So I just decided I'd photograph it in a way that actually showed what the room was like. And this is a reproduction from my book, Artists in Their Studios. ... Anyway, Emily was illustrated in 1926 by Marius Barbeau and Eric Brown, and subsequently taken to Ontario, where she was feted at the National Gallery in Ottawa and at the Art Gallery of Toronto. And she met Lauren Harris, who gave her a whole idea about how to paint, and you can really see it in these paintings. This is from her second trip up to the Indian villages. But don't let those Indian villages confuse you. Almost all of Emily's paintings were actually done in Victoria. I mean, many of them were done in her studio from the sketches, but so much of her work, her late work, which is particularly interesting to me, is local stuff. I mean, here she is in the elephant, and you could just plot on the maps the places she took the elephant. She painted at Mount Douglas, she painted at Albert Head, she painted at the gravel pits in Minchosum, she painted in the gorge at the end of her life. She had the elephant taken there. She was, you know, she just wanted to get out into the countryside. She didn't want to go very far. It was all here. And as you're perhaps aware, that's where she painted these remarkable paintings. These are not the towering rainforest. It's Victoria's stuff. It's Gold Street, you know. That's what these paintings are all about. And, well, I'm particularly passionate about art which speaks of the places where it was created. And these are great. Well, come on, I'll just go forward. That painting is called Light Swooping Through, and that one belongs to the Provincial Archives. It's in the museum right now. Someday we can have a long discussion about where did Emily Carr's paintings go and how come we can't see them all. Because mostly they're here in Victoria. They are. The largest collection of Emily Carr's work is about 100 yards from here, and always has been. But for some reason, our archives, I mean, even in the current show, there are, I think, 18 of her paintings there. And they make a big fuss about showing you paintings you've never seen before. Well, all well and good, but it's not really getting the job done. I want a shrine to Emily Carr in which they put up massive quantities of her work, which tell the whole story, where we can go repeatedly and visit again and again. In the end, Lauren Harris, who was her chief executor, selected eventually 250 of her works and took them to the Vancouver Art Gallery, of which she was on the board of directors, and they have remained there ever since. She gave them to the province of British Columbia, but the Vancouver Art Gallery, there was no Victoria Art Gallery, and Vancouver eventually made the case, and now they own them. But all the rest of the paintings, in large measure, her early work, and much of the interesting examples of her late work, are here in the archives. They own at least 1,000 of her drawings and paintings, and all of her manuscripts, book rugs, photo albums, and so on and so forth. I want to also say the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria has done heroic work to amass a fascinating collection and now live up to the responsibility that they have to show it in the best way they can constantly, because people want to see it. And they're doing their very best, and they have an excellent and essentially permanent show on there at the moment. So if you've never seen it lately, you should all be members of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. Please. Let's do that. It's cheap at the price. And so necessary. Because they'll show you the work. This is a painting called Happiness, which belongs to the Maltwood Museum. It was given to Madame Pavlich, who was a friend of Emily's as a youngster, and eventually signed a lot of Emily Carr's paintings for her. Anyway, beautiful painting, but local stuff. Come on, let's go forward. There's Happiness. And we got a gravity problem. This beautiful painting belongs to the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria and is the sketch for Above the Gravel Pits. The gravel pits belongs to the oil on canvas belongs to the Vancouver Art Gallery and is a great treasure. But this is the original on-location sketch in or oil paint on paper, painted in the Chosen, and is a singularly beautiful painting, quite as beautiful as the canvas. And just in case you don't notice, these are tree stumps. Eh? She was very sympathetic to the fact that we were getting rid of all the trees as fast as we could.
Did she have a name for them, screamers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, screamers were the name she gave to the splinters that come up from the tree stumps. But yeah, it's probably the same idea. This is a picture of Beacon Hill Park looking north. In her later years, she really loved to paint the sea and the sky. So many people say, oh, I don't like her paintings, all these dark trees and stuff. Well, especially in the later part of her life, she adored painting the great, vast emptiness of our locale. This is Victoria Art Gallery once again, as is this. This is painting that she did at Albert Head. You know, for me, the thought of collecting the paintings of Emily Carr which show Victoria and presenting them as that fact for those of us who live here, I personally find something very appealing, even exciting, about seeing paintings of places I know.